Sure. Hi, everyone. Congratulations on making it to finals. I got to watch some of you yesterday, so congratulations. And I'm excited to see the people that I haven't seen yet. I live out in Salt Lake City, Utah. My daughter, some of you might have been in debate with my daughter yesterday, Olivia. And I love passion, as you guys know. I love enthusiasm, but I love the content and structure, to hear the structure. Also supporting data. I know you guys are doing direct questioning, which I have, love and hate at the same time. But I think as our Parley will say too, it's about respect. I do like to hear a full thought, not just you taking up the full 30 seconds, just so someone else can actually respond. So I like to hear responses and, good content. So good luck, everybody, and have fun today.
All right. Judge Siddiqui.
Yeah, glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to some great speeches. What I look for is a good structure, well-structured speech, and see if you're reasonably within the time limits, either not going either under or over, and how well you are connecting your points and making an impact towards the end. So, looking forward to it.
All right, Judge Camacho.
Yes, I am very excited for this event. I'm looking forward to some great speeches and debates that you all do. My paradigm is very similar to what's stated in NSBA. I'm just looking for some great speeches. I hope that type of speeches evolve as we progress into the arguments, and I hope to see some good final summations of the arguments as well. So that's just kind of where I'm at. But I know that if you are here, you are already creating speeches that are top notch.
Judge Lambert.
Pretty much ditto. So I like respectful debate and I like a well-organized speech.
That goes for me too. My paradigm is posted on Tab Room if any of you want to look at it. I like organization. I like when a speech is defined. I like when there's good evidence, good analysis of that evidence. I do want to hear refutation. I'd like to hear people actually taking somebody else's argument and trying to prove their argument wrong. I do expect congeniality. I do expect respect from each other. You can attack the arguments. In fact, you're supposed to attack the arguments. You're not supposed to attack the person. So that's really big for me. Also, as top-notch debaters as you are, I know that the parliament or the PO might actually give you some grace time, but I'm a big stickler on timing. If you go 3 minutes and 10 seconds, that's a little bit too long. If you go, 2 minutes and 40 seconds short. So really try to hit that 3-minute mark. If you don't, and you're way off, it's going to make my job a little bit easier as far as ranking goes. It looks like Mr. Berlat posted a live stream on YouTube. So I'm going to ask all of the observers to please copy that link and exit the Zoom meeting so we can get started here. Unless you're Tab, a scorer or a participant, I should only have about 17 people in here. So I see Mr. Berlat's in here, so I might have 18. Everyone's set up okay. So there's
and also Mr. Harrington with the live stream.
Okay, all right. So I think we're ready to get started. Senator Dilip Kumar, do you want to get things started?
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Parliamentarian. Just for the preset recency, do you have that order so that I can put it into the Google spreadsheet? Sorry.
I'll be honest, when you say there's a preset recency, I look through the rules and I don't see anything with that. But I mean, it just looks like what it's listed. I don't know if there's a. I don't know. I mean, I can copy and paste how everyone's listed in the finals round. pairings. Is that what you're looking for?
That's good. Anyway, I think the very beginning of the rules of the docket, I think it's rule 6 at the very beginning of the docket explains that. Senator Rodriguez, did you have something?
Oh, no, I was just going to point out the same thing.
Yeah, it's rule 6 at the very beginning of the docket.
So here's my rule 6 of the okay, but I guess my question is, where would I get that information? Is it from the pairings?
I believe that my parliamentarians had been sent to them. Does Tab have it? I'm not too sure.
Carly, do you want me to, you're talking about the rules for this,
I'm more curious about this preset recency. I don't have a list of any sort other than the pairings, and I don't know if the pairings is what we're talking about here.
I'll make copy this. I can send it to you. I'll put it in. I think this is what they're talking about. Let me put it in the chat.
I believe it is the pairings, and I just kind of sent that.
Judge Camacho does have the
Okay,
speaker order, the precedence list for the round.
that's fine. I mean, that's the one I have too. So go ahead and use that.
Awesome. I will use that exactly. And just as I copy that into my spreadsheet, I'm just going to tell everybody, just so everybody knows, when I'm calling on questioners or speakers, I'm going to wait a brief 2 seconds. I know there's quite a bit of lag when it comes to the internet. So just waiting an extra 2 seconds, I think, is very equitable to ensure that everybody has an opportunity to ask a question, give a speech, whatever it is. With that, we will get into debate on the first piece of legislation. The bill is titled Corporations. Is there an author or a sponsor? Looking for an author or a sponsor. We cannot start debate without an author or a sponsor. Is anybody willing to give this speech?
Mr. President,
Senator Ebrard Vesio.
I move for a 2-minute in-house recess.
Seconds. Assuming unanimous consent, this does pass. Guys, we definitely need an author or sponsor to even get started on this docket. And seeing as this was the bill people put up, we definitely need somebody to give the speech.
So quick question. Is it that we have a bad split on the bill, or is it the people that aren't comfortable giving the first half?
I think the better avenue is raise your hand if you have an affirmation speech. Literally one person.
Okay, is everyone else on neg or
Okay.
just undecided?
I'm willing to give the sponsorship since I'm the only affirmation speech after seeing this, but I would encourage everyone else to please flip.
Yeah, I can try to make a speech and switch it.
All right, we need 4 more Fs though. Can anyone else switch?
I mean, I have evidence, but it would take time, which is why I think maybe
You'll
going
probably
to
have 2 cycles since I said.
Just give me a cycle.
Okay, all right, so we have 4 Fs.
Yeah, I'll give the sponsorship.
Awesome. We have, I think, 30 seconds left in the recess. If anybody needs that extra time just to get started, we can take that. Senator Rodriguez.
Motion to end the recess early.
Any objections? Seeing no objections, this does pass. With that, is there an author or a sponsor on the bill for corporations? Senator Khan, thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Quite an unusual start, but glad that we're getting through this. So this is Senator Khan, spelled K-A-N, short and simple. Speaking for the first time today, just give me a thumbs up or a signal whenever you're ready. Thank you, and I'll be happy to get started. And for the judges, is it okay if I time myself using my phone? Awesome. Pia, ready? Great. The top 1% of Americans own half of America's wealth. Beyond their fortunes, their commonality lies in the exploitation of their workers. When inequality ravages our country, it falls to this chamber to act. Pass my legislation. The focus of this chamber has to be reducing inequality, and this is the framework that I offer for today's debate. Sadly, it has taken a pandemic for the inequity that has become rampant in our country to be noticed, and it's time for change. So why have so many companies needed bailouts in the status quo? Well, the easiest example that we can look at is the COVID-19 stimulus package. Peter Evis, writing for the New York Times on April 24th of 2020, tells us that few corporations have been adequately prepared for this pandemic, and efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19 have hit certain industries particularly hard. But why? It's because corporations have spent a large amount of money buying back their own stocks and being financially irresponsible, which exposes the failings of current corporation strategies. They're aligning their priorities and actions with the interests of their shareholders, not their workers or their consumers. When companies are financially irresponsible, it is the pockets of American taxpayers and your constituents that pay the price. Corporate failure has forced Americans to pay $150 billion over the past 10 years in bailouts. We're living in a nation where the top 1% are held above the bottom 99, 100% of the time. We can do better. That's exactly why you passed my legislation. And the second reason for you to affirm is ensuring corporate accountability. So why does passing my legislation ensure corporations are responsible? Section 1 imposes financial conditions that have to be met in order for companies to be eligible for bailouts and subsidies. The status quo has made it apparent that those bailouts are vital for companies, forcing their compliance to my legislation. That's a lot of ground to cover here, so I'll focus just on Section 1C, which bans stock buybacks for companies that want funding. That is crucial because companies inflate their value and avoid corporate taxes using those buybacks. Box explains on March 6th of 2018 that out of America's $54 billion tax windfall, $21 billion has been kicked to shareholders in the form of buybacks, meaning that almost half of a viable source of government revenue is lost. When executives are faced with the choice of paying taxes or profiting for themselves, it's become clear as to why this practice has become so excessively used. There's a key issue with this uncontrolled stock buyback: the threat of recession in the long term. The implications of emerging recessions are catastrophic. Check your privilege. Pass this legislation.
Thank you, Senator, for that speech of 2 minutes and 56 seconds. We're gonna have 4 questioning blocks after this speech and the next one, and 2 questioning blocks after every single one after that. With that, questioners, please raise your placards. Between those standing, it'll first go to Senator Everard Vesio.
Thank you, Mr. President. So why do companies participate in stock buybacks during a recession?
Right. So actually the stock buybacks, they've been stopping those since the recession because that was the reason why they were losing so much money.
Wait, I'm confused. So if they stop doing stock buybacks, then why are you banning it in the bill?
Right, because it weakens companies financially so that when financial difficulties like the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and they're no longer prepared.
I'm really confused. Why would a company knowingly do something that would weaken them financially?
Because it inflates their value at the cost of their financial stability.
Senator Rodriguez.
The COVID-19 pandemic stopped business for basically every corporation. How is it fair to say stock buybacks were the main reason why businesses were losing so much money?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying it isn't the only, I'm not saying it's the only reason. I'm saying it's a major contributor to the financial vulnerability of American
With or without stock buybacks, wouldn't have corporations still suffered?
Obviously, yes, but they wouldn't have suffered as much if they didn't weaken their companies so that their CEOs
so
could
why
get
are
more
we
money.
completely banning stock buybacks if they were not the sole contribution
Because
to
they were
this
a major
story?
contribution.
Hi, Senator. So let's talk about the Section 1C. This section bans companies from using stock splits. Can you tell me what the purpose of splitting stocks is?
All right, so the purpose of stock buybacks, since I'm not entirely sure,
stock splits.
I'm sure you can tell me.
Yes, these stock splits are used to make the company's shares more accessible to smaller investors. Why should we disincentivize companies from doing that?
Right, because either way, you can see how their stock games have financially weakened the company, making it so that they can't even survive despite all the grants we've given them.
Okay, companies want stocks to go up, right?
Sure.
And stocks going up increases a company's value, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so if over half of working class Americans own stock, doesn't that enrich them too?
No, that's clearly not true from the COVID-19 pandemic. When
Okay, but if an
businesses
individual
crash-
owns a stock and that stock goes up,
So if
don't they
you
get
let
more
me answer
money?
your question, Mr. Lai, when companies inflate their value and then crash in a pandemic like the COVID-19 pandemic, that's where everyone loses money, including the
Representative,
people who buy those stocks.
are you aware that the stock market is at all-time highs right now, enriching the working class American?
Right, that wasn't the case a few months
Okay,
ago,
that's
and thousands
fine.
of Americans lost
Thank
money.
you. Please don't abuse the grace period. Stop right at the 30 seconds. With that, thank you to the speaker. Are there any speakers in the negation? Senator Evrard Vescio.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the judges, my name is Michael Evard Vescio, speaking for the first time today. Any indication when you're ready, and I'll be happy to begin.
Always ready?
Perfect. Is anyone not ready? I know we have a lot of judges. I don't want to miss anyone. Everyone's good? Perfect. The affirmation asks us to treat corporations like people, but you can't do that when these people are dying. This bill isn't a lifeline. It's a heart attack called bankruptcy. But let's play their game, because if you treat corporations like people, you have a medical disaster thanks to bloated CEO contracts, the inability to protect themselves from a virus, and companies hemorrhaging money like it's blood in a bad action movie. So let's treat corporations like people and see why this bill is a death sentence for the American economy. First, let's roll into the emergency room and assess the damage. Companies are losing liquidity at a rapid rate. As Reuters reports on July 29th, the total US GDP has dropped by 35% in the second quarter alone due to the coronavirus. Corporations have less cash on hand than ever before. So naturally, this bill seeks to force them to have cash on hand, pushing companies in Section 1 to put 6 months of operating expenses, money they don't have, in banks that continually fail. In the context of coronavirus, this is nothing short of medical malpractice. As CNN reports just yesterday, the next stimulus for corporations won't come until after this bill would be passed, dooming every single company, as there is no way they can meet the requirements outlined in this legislation. But I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the little guy, as today's legislation treats all corporations like people, including small businesses. As the Washington Post explains in May, 100,000 small businesses have closed permanently during coronavirus. They need help more than ever. But obviously, if you're bankrupt, you can't really follow the regulations in this bill. Legislation that forces companies to pay their own way out of a financial crisis is like asking a dying patient to perform their own life-saving procedure. Right now, we need to be triaging our patients and allowing the new stimulus package to finally get them off life support. This bill does the opposite. But now that we've stitched up the affirmations, apparent holes in logic, let's see who is going to have to foot this costly medical bill. Senator Khan gives an interesting contradiction when he says stock buybacks inflate value but are financially bad. Needless to say, we need a resolution. Quite simply, stock buybacks get companies immediate cash on hand, something this bill bans. So how do businesses come up with liquidity? It's called firing workers, it's called cutting wages, and it's called ending benefits. The University of Chicago finds in July that with a stimulus package, 4 million workers have had their wages cut, and another 6 million have been moved to part-time. Meanwhile, job losses have hit their highest point since the Great Depression. Understand that this bill gets rid of the only thing saving our economy from going entirely off the cliff, as it stops the next stimulus package from being implemented. The Wall Street Journal explains in April that the first coronavirus stimulus package gave workers a $600 boost every month on average. You can't start preparing for the next recession when we're still trying to get our way out of the first one. When your patient is on the operating table, you don't just hope for the best like the affirmation, but you have to plan for the worst. Please negate.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 13 seconds. Please don't abuse the grace period. Questioners, raise your placards. Senator Chang.
Okay, Representative, are bailouts and bankruptcies the same thing?
Bailouts come to stop bankruptcies.
No. Under a bankruptcy, the government imposes certain regulations on the company. Is it the same thing as a bailout under a legal definition?
Well, like, it depends on what type of company you are, right? If you're a bankrupt bank, the government's obligated to bail you out. While if you're like a small business,
so now let's talk about the little guy, right? If I'm eliminating buybacks, that means the companies have more money to fund
But
to.
here's the problem. Small businesses aren't able to get those buybacks, and it applies wholesale.
I think I lost you here. So you stated in your speech here today that they're losing liquidity. And so now they're going to go ahead and buy back more stocks. Can you explain how that leads to more liquidity?
So like essentially a stock is a valuation of the company, right? It's a dollar amount.
It's not money they have on hand, is it?
When you're buying back the stock, it's increasing the value of your business and therefore the money you can spend on said business. Because of the
if you increase the value of your business, that money's now in the business, not in your hands to spend, which reduces
exactly in the business, which spends the money.
Hi, Senator. So just empirically, where does most of the money from stock buybacks go to in companies?
So you're going to run this argument where you're saying it goes to the top share.
It goes to corporate bonuses.
That's why they immediately buy back in a recession, which is entirely different.
How are we benefiting like employees or small businesses under this legislation?
Well, here's why it's bad for small businesses. You say they have to have 6 months of operating expenses in a bank. They simply don't have that money.
Do small businesses buy back their stocks?
They're for bankruptcy. They're gone.
Thank you. The questioning period has elapsed. There's one more questioning block. Would anybody else like to take it? Senator Rodriguez.
So let's talk about Section 1A for a second. So you're concerned that these operating expenses for banks will be too much for small businesses to handle. Like, about how much is an operating expense for banks?
No, it's not the operating expense for banks. It's 6 months of operating expenses for the corporation.
No. It's section, right. We're talking about Section 1A. It says you need to have 6 months worth of operating expenses in an American banking institution. How much is that going to be?
That would probably, it varies business by business. I can't just give you like an estimation because
so
the operating expenses.
So if it varies by business, wouldn't it be?
It has elapsed. With that, we're going to move to an affirmative speech. Speakers in the affirmation rise. Senator Smith, unopposed.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Senator Smith from Central District, Minnesota, and I am going to begin, assuming that all judges are ready. PO, it's perfect. Awesome, fantastic, great. Growing up, my grandfather always told me to measure twice, cut once, meaning to really consider a decision and its weight before you make it. Now, with the $2.2 trillion bailout rolled out by our government earlier this year, I don't think that they were really measuring what Americans need, what our constituents are asking for. That's why today we passed today's legislation. First, because people should be bailed out during COVID, not corporations. Second, because of this distinctive stock buybacks being decentralized. And third, because the current bailout requirements leave room for abuse. So first, people need to be bailed out first. Before progressing any further in the round, I want to clarify the intent of the legislation. Our Congress always tries to balance aiding our constituents and protecting business so that our economy can have similar, substantial, easy growth. Now, that's not happening at the moment. According to Bloomberg in 2020, we need to support Americans in order to keep essential businesses going. Now, Representative Khan, during questioning, you pointed out that there is the top 1% being prioritized over the other 99%. And I want to draw attention to this because this is something that we need to change. According to CNBC 5 days ago, 9 million Americans are still waiting for their first stimulus check from that $2.2 original rollout. They haven't received a single one, meaning that they're not able to pay for their basic necessities, for their mortgages, for the bills that are piling up over the past 6 months of quarantine. Now, our government has been providing subsidies and bails out to other corporations, but those corporations don't always need the help that we're giving them. Within Section 1, subsections A, B, and C all ensure that we do not give bailouts to corporations that don't need it. If they can't prove that they don't have American banking for the past 6 months, they're not qualified for a bailout. If they don't have all of their expenditures in line, so they may have some under the table business going on, we don't provide them bailouts. And if they have not engaged in stock buybacks, which I'm going to explain how they're so detrimental later, then they don't receive bailouts. We are prioritizing our people and reallocating our money so that we're helping our constituents who need it most. Now, Representative Delury, in questioning, you asked, you said that it makes it easier for small investors to buy into companies with stock buybacks, but this is completely false. As Reuters explains in March 2019, stock buybacks are a way for companies to reinvest in their own selves and grow the relative share held by investors. So let me explain it like this. If you have 5 investors with stock and you decide to buy back one of those, then instead of all of your 5 investors holding 20% of the company, they now each hold 25%. They hold bigger stock in the company. Now, that is limiting the amount of investors which are able to buy into into companies, doing exactly the opposite of what the negation is trying to claim. Now, moving into my second point, disincentivizing stock buybacks. According to the Harvard Business Review in January 2020, stock buybacks made as an open market purchase make no contribution to the productive capabilities of the firm. Indeed, these distributions to shareholders, which generally come out of top dividends, disrupt the growth dynamic that links the productivity and pay of the labor force, but they don't help level out the economy. Now, moving on to the last point, the current bailout requirements are leaving room for abuse. No one is able to get the stimulus checks that they are necessarily needing, and we are protecting our corporations over our people. It's time that we stop that and affirm.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 12 seconds. We're gonna have 2 questioning blocks for every speech on this bill hereafter. Questioners rise. Senator Everard Vesio.
Thank you. So obviously corporations have lost a lot of money, right?
Yes, but they have the top 1% during the past 6 months has gained over $30 billion. The bottom percent of the US population has lost that money.
Yeah, but the problem is today's legislation doesn't just apply to the top 1%. It applies to every corporation, right?
Yeah, it does apply to every corporation, but individuals need to be supported above corporations.
So how is it fair that the mom and pop Apple shop on my street has to have the same standard as Apple the company?
So it's a good question. So
Hi, Senator. So I wasn't talking about stock buybacks. I was talking about stock splits. These stock splits allow for companies to have smaller investors invest in their company. Why should we be disincentivizing those?
Okay, so Section 1C is talking specifically about stock buybacks and stock splits. Within my legislation, I was talking about stock buybacks, so it's a way for investors to—
Yeah, but stock splits, this legislation is also stopping stock splits. Why are we doing that?
So stock splits, also by the Harvard Business Review card that I shared, has also been proven to have a more rugged economic—
Question period has elapsed. With that, Senator Everard Vesio.
Point of personal privilege, permission to exit chamber.
Granted.
Thank you.
And just a general note to the chamber, for any point of personal privilege just to enter or exit chamber, you can send it to me in a PM. It should work much faster that way. We don't have to waste time on that. With that, speakers in the negation, raise your placards. Senator Naluri.
I thank the chair. For the judges, that is Senator Naluri. Please give me any indication when you're ready. I will also be timing myself on my phone, so just making sure that's okay. Okay. While I certainly agree with the affirmation today that we shouldn't be forcing our taxpayers to pay for these corporate welfare programs as these businesses abuse their benefits, it is wrong for us to create a blanket policy statement with today's legislation. Every company is different, and their actions cannot be brought down to 3 simple conditions. Stand with me in the negation of today's legislation because it unfairly penalizes certain companies. Now, I would first like to talk about Section 1C of today's legislation, which practically every speaker on today's debate has brought up, specifically Senator Khan and Senator Smith, who tell us all the negative aspects of stock buybacks, but they miss one clear aspect of this section, which says that corporations will be denied corporate welfare if they have engaged in stock splits. Now, when I brought this up to Senator Khan and Senator Smith in questioning, they could not provide me with a good reason as to why stock splits are actually negatively impacting our economy. And that's because they aren't. The issue with this statement is that it disincentivizes corporations to use stock splits, but we see that in the status quo, these stock splits do nothing but help small individual investors to gain access to stocks. As Investopedia explains, in September of 2020, a stock split is when a company takes one share of a stock and splits it into multiple smaller stocks so the value of that stock decreases. The reason companies do this is so stock valuations aren't as high and smaller investors can still be shareholders of the company. These stock splits increase accessibility to the company and help companies stay diversified. Corporations have no other ulterior motive when creating these stock splits. According to Anna Louise Jackson and Ariel Oshia, who are writers in the investing program, in July of 2020, stock splits don't hurt or help investors or the companies creating them. They simply help smaller investors. When we pass today's legislation, we say that this positive practice of stock splitting is bad and we disincentivize corporations from using them. Or by forcing companies to stop stock splitting and preventing many smaller investors from participating in the market. Now, second, we fail today's legislation because it makes a blanket statement without fully analyzing a company's motives. As Tejiv Pettinger, a teacher and writer on economics, explains, in June of 2019, the government currently subsidizes many companies with positive externalities, meaning they have better practices that promote, which means they promote better practices. For instance, according to Clean Technica, in August of 2020, Tesla has received over $2 billion in subsidies from the US government because it promotes renewable energy and green practices. But despite the fact that Tesla has been nothing but good for our economy and our environment, today's legislation would make them ineligible for any future subsidies because it introduced a stock split. Fail today's legislation because it places a blanket statement without considering all of the motives of a business. A company's impact and profile cannot be brought down to 3 bare conditions. Negate.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 8 seconds. Questioners, raise your placards. Senator Khan.
Hi. So, yes or no, do companies want their stocks to be volatile or stable?
Stable.
All right. Yeah. So they want them to be stable because they don't want the prices to drop. But what happens if you keep changing the price of your stock with stock splits?
Okay, the thing about stock splits, it's you're not changing the value of the stock. You're simply making, for instance, you're making one $100 stock.
You just told me that because it's splitting the stocks and devaluing it, that makes it more accessible for people to buy it, right? That increases volatility.
The total value of the stock.
Enlighten me for a second. Are stock splits better investments than before they were split?
Yes, for smaller investors.
No, they aren't. The value and the actual return for a stock split, like the returns are also halved. So the actual investment value isn't any better. So
okay,
why exactly is it a benefit?
Sure, investment value isn't any better, but the net benefit from a stock split is that it helps smaller investors actually get those stocks.
Right, but how does it benefit? Like, we're talking about companies here. How does this benefit the company?
Questioning period has elapsed. With that, we're moving to a speech on the affirmation. Affirmative speakers, rise. Speakers on the affirmation. We need affirmation speakers. Seeing no affirmation, Senator Wong, thank you.
Thank you. For the first time this session, I'm Senator Wong speaking on the affirmation, and any indication from my judges whenever they're ready would be perfect. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Ma'am, thank you. I'll pin the PO and go ahead. More than a decade after the 2008 financial crisis and the government rescues of banks that followed it, the term bailout has a wider resonance in the context of the pandemic today. It's clear that this Congress has allowed big corporations to go unchecked for far too long. So the question in today's debate then is, who will this legislation actually benefit? The affirmation's answer is the American people. Pass. First, Senator Everett Bessio told you that stock buybacks give companies easy cash on hand. That's not the case. Most of the money actually goes towards corporate bonuses. Karen Brettel of Reuters tells us in December of 2015 that the money from acquired buybacks overwhelmingly finds its way back into the hands of executives. This happens on a regular basis. For example, an executive for Humana Incorporated was able to add $1.65 million to his own salary through buybacks. When executives are faced with the choice of paying corporate taxes and profiting themselves, it becomes clear as to why this practice has been in excessive use and only growing in popularity. But now, I'd like to distance myself from Senator Smith on my own side, who tells us that stock buybacks decrease investment. That's not the case. Let me get into that. Next, Senator Naluri told you that stock splits make it easier for small investors to get a share. Here's the problem. Because stock buybacks artificially inflate a company's value, it gives investors a false sense of security to attract more investors in the first place. That's really risky, which means that in the end, more people who are stakeholders in the company lose. Senator Everett Bessio, if you want to actually benefit companies and bail them out, you're going to pass. But next, Senator Everett Bessio is also concerned about small businesses. First, I would contend that that's not the focus of this legislation at all. It's about keeping large corporations accountable and not just handing out bailouts whenever they ask for it. We can pass separate legislation to aid small businesses. But even if you don't buy that, look to Section 3 of this legislation, which stipulates that the Department of Treasury will determine whether a company has met the necessary criteria outlined under Section 1. What does that mean? That means that the Department of Treasury isn't likely to call small businesses or have small businesses not qualify for federal loans. But now, let's address the largest affirmative impact that so far no one has been talking about. It's relieving the burden on taxpayers. The Wall Street Journal tells us in May of this year that there's a $54 billion of corporate bailouts, and that falls on American taxpayers. At the end of the day, in the context of the pandemic, if you want to actually help the American people, you will start by checking big corporations. Pass.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Questioners, raise your placards. Senator Naluri.
Hi, Senator. So I completely agree. Stock buybacks are very bad, but can you tell me why stock splits are bad?
So stock splits do attract small investors, like you're telling me, but the reason that
why should we stop companies?
Yeah, so the reason that that's bad is because when you attract investors based on buybacks, that's increasing that false sense of
We're
security,
attracting
meaning that
investors
everyone
based on
loses.
stock splits.
It's the same principle.
No, it isn't. They're two completely different things. In a stock buyback,
you're still attracting investors.
Docker.
Hi, Representative. In a pandemic, how do stock buybacks specifically ultimately cause a threat of a recession?
I mean, I would argue that when big corporations buy back their own stock and that revenue only goes to the corporate bonuses.
Why is it only in the time of a pandemic? Wouldn't it happen even if the pandemic wasn't going on?
Yeah, it's not only in the pandemic. It's worse in a pandemic because now taxpayers have to bear that burden and they're already hit hard by the coronavirus.
But this legislation doesn't really do anything to alleviate the burden off of taxpayers.
I mean, we can pass separate legislation specifically for that. We have to check big corporations first.
The questioning period has elapsed. With that, we'll move on to a speech in the negation. Speakers in the negation, raise your placards. Senator Lai, unopposed.
Great, I thank the chair. This is Representative Lai speaking for the first time today, first time this session. At the leisure of all those above me, just give me a nod, thumbs up, judges, when you guys are ready, and I'll go ahead and start. All right, let's go ahead and start then. Infamous British philosopher Rick Astley once said, "I'm never going to give you up, never going to let you down, never going to turn around and desert you." It's because this piece of legislation deserts the average everyday American and their financial well-being that we have to fail. First, let's talk about how bailouts are necessary for economic stability. And second, let's go over how stock splits and buybacks are beneficial for the average American, which there have been a lot of discussion about today. But first, let's talk about how bailouts are necessary for economic stability. Representative Smith and Representative Wong want to support individual Americans. Here's why this piece of legislation does the opposite. The only way to do that is to ensure that businesses that individuals work for stay afloat and can still employ individuals. Here's why. As the Harvard University Political Review found empirically, that financial bailouts from 2008 and 2009 were absolutely necessary. What they found was that bailouts saved the American financial system from utter collapse, while actually turning a profit for the government and taxpayers via stock in companies like Ford and GM. What they also found was that bailouts likely saved about 3 million jobs and trillions of dollars of economic growth in 2008. That's why UPenn Wharton in July 2020 corroborated that during the coronavirus pandemic, the Federal Reserve bailed out hundreds of US companies like AT&T, American Airlines, and Marriott. Using $1 trillion of CARES Act funding and the power of the Treasury, they successfully saved millions of regular people's jobs and Representative Smith, while also giving individual bailouts to people via a $1,200 check that hundreds of millions of Americans received. But under this piece of legislation, none of those acts would have been legal, making our financial system an absolute disaster. But second, let's talk about how stock splits and buybacks are beneficial for the average American. Now, it seems that nobody in this round, specifically Representative Khan and Representative Monohar, fully understand what Representative Naluri's point about stock splits actually is. Here's why stock splits are actually a good thing, via an example. Barron's 2 weeks ago gives us a very good example. 2 weeks ago, Apple's share price was about $500, making it largely inaccessible to the average American because of its high cost. So, to combat this, they split their stock 4-to-1. Now the price is only $100, making it more accessible for the average American. That's important because buybacks are also important too. As a Gallup poll found in June 2020, 58% of Americans actually own stocks, mostly in retirement accounts like a 401k, and another 13% in monthly pension payments. Representative Khan wants to come up here and paint a picture of corporate malfeasance that only enriches in companies and their executives. But what he doesn't mention is that the average American benefits from stock buybacks. The fact is that the majority of Americans hold stocks, and when stock prices go up, which buybacks allow, the average American gains money and is enriched. So, representatives, it's time to finally heed Rick Astley's advice. Let's fail to ensure that we don't give up, turn around, and desert the average American.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Questioners, raise your placards. Between those standing, Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So, Senator, you're saying that your last point, you were really touching on, since half of Americans own stocks. When we held stocks.
So specifically, 58% of the average American.
If you allow me to ask.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. So you're saying that the half that can possibly buy stocks are going to be benefited, but that still leaves half of Americans who are the lower income individuals without any subsidies.
Representative, do you have a question?
Give it to them.
Do you have a question? That seems like a statement. Anyways, 58% of Americans and 13% of Americans own stocks in pension funds or in index funds for their 401k.
Senator Chang.
Okay, so more than half of Americans own stocks. How much of the actual market do they own?
Okay, I bet you could tell me, but I'm pretty sure it's about 60 to 70%.
Okay, moving on, let's talk about stock splits. In that Apple stock split, how much of those newly created stocks were issued to current shareholders?
Okay, so here's a misconception about what stock splits are. They don't issue any new shares, right? They take one individual share, which is going to be too expensive for the average everyday American to buy, and they split it up into 4 parts or X amount of parts to make it more accessible for people to buy.
Thank you. The questioning period has elapsed. Senator Khan, your point of personal privilege is granted.
I thank the chair.
With that, speakers on the affirmation, raise your placards. Between those, Senator Chang.
I thank the chair. My name is Senator Chang, spelled C-H-A-N-G, speaking for the first time today. If you're not ready, just let me know verbally and I'll wait. All right.
One moment, please.
Okay.
Senator Naluri, that's granted too.
Is everyone good? Okay. Senator Lai likes to tout the high value of the stock market as an indicator of good health. But the truth is, you can't tell a patient's having a heart attack just by looking at them on the outside. So first, let's affirm today's bill because it helps small businesses, the ones that Senator Evard-Bescu is so passionate about. The New York Times reports in April 26 of this year that the small business loan program we set up for small businesses saw 200 large but low-profile companies take billions of dollars meant for smaller corporations. This happened because we didn't put in place regulations and restrictions on who could actually get buybacks. Now, Senator Evard-Bescu is also saying that small corporations are going to be hurt by this bill because they're bankrupt. But understand that according to Jeffrey Miron, an economist at Harvard University, bankruptcies are not the same thing as bailouts. Bankruptcies merely change the ownership of a company that is failing. They still have a bank account, they still have operating expenses, and they can later apply for a bailout. But second, let's move to the biggest point in this debate, which has been whether or not we can prevent economic crises. But first, I want to touch on the issue of stock splits. So Senator Lai is actually correct when he says that new stocks aren't issued, they're split. And that's a problem because according to James Chen from Gain Capital, stock splits are only used to signal investor confidence and the majority already go to existing shareholders, not to new ones, so it doesn't actually increase accessibility. Now let's talk about whether or not stock buybacks create a threat of a recession. Harvard Business Review reports in January 7th this year that stock buybacks by companies on the S&P 500 total $4.3 trillion. But it's not just draining liquidity, like Senator Evard-Bescu mentioned. The problem comes when we realize 30% of these transactions are funded by corporate debt. So companies are essentially plunging themselves into debt to enrich their richest shareholders and their executives. That's obviously really bad because it creates financial fragility. In fact, Wall Street experts have been predicting that it will fuel the next recession for years. And after COVID hit, a lot of companies stopped buying back stocks because they realized how detrimental it was to their bottom line. Now, I agree completely with Senator Lai when he says bailouts are necessary, but that actually flows to the affirmation, because when bailouts are necessary, companies will stop using corporate buybacks. And when they stop using corporate buybacks, they're more financially stable, and we essentially have to give them less money when we do bail them out. We save money for our taxpayers. I last want to talk about another big issue in this round, which has been, will banning buybacks actually help workers? So I'm going to give you a study by the Roosevelt Institute in July 31st of 2018, when they say, even as the stock market is surging, economic growth is so sluggish, productivity is so low, and increases in worker compensation is so piddling because of short-sighted stock buybacks. When you take away the short-term option, because companies don't want to pay dividends, that means losing money, their best option is to invest in long-term competitiveness, which means reimbursing workers higher wages for their work and investing in research and development. Interestingly, the word corporation derives from the Latin word corpus, which means body. When you look at the internal ravaging that the disease of corporate buybacks have done to this country, you realize we need to affirm.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 8 seconds. Questioners, raise your placards. Senator Lai.
Okay, so you said that bailouts are necessary, right?
Yes, those are your own words as well.
Right. So out of the top 500 US companies in the stock market, how many would be eligible for bailouts under this piece of legislation?
Okay, so under this legislation, almost none of them would actually.
Okay, so almost none of them. So let's run with that.
That would be incorrect. About 100 of the S&P 500 companies don't engage in buybacks, but
they do engage in stock splits, right? So how would we bail out the majority of companies?
A lot of aid, and we can't really afford to give any more now. So in the next 2 years, we'll be able to give them more aid.
Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of yes/no statements for you to agree or disagree with. So bailouts and subsidies happen in the FA and egg world, correct?
Correct.
And the goal of Section 1, A, B, and C is to prevent any companies who don't need or are ineligible from having a bailout or buyback from receiving from the federal government, correct?
Right. I just want to add quickly, as well as companies that contribute to the recession.
Yes. So if we are trying to pass legislation that is just preventing any companies who don't necessarily need buybacks or subsidies or bails, how are any of the next arguments going to come to fruition when we're not negatively impacting those companies?
Senator Naluri, that point of personal privilege to re-enter is granted. Speakers on the negation, raise your placards. Senator Sudhakar, unopposed.
I thank the chair. That's Representative Sudhakar, spelled S-U-D-H-A-K-A-R. Speaking on the negation for this bill for the first time this legislative session. Judges, give me any indication when you're ready. Perfect. The concept of corporations as people is a legal fiction that allows corporations to benefit from many of the same due process protections that natural people enjoy. The affirmation on today's bill are enamored by the rhetoric of the impacts used in Representative Khan's speeches, and I understand why. However, they have failed to account for his inherent flaws in this legislation. We cannot keep bailing out corporate America. Negate. First, the biggest problem in the status quo is bailouts cost taxpayer money. Representative Khan tells you why corporations need bailouts in a pandemic and even gives impacts of a threat of the recession. But this legislation cannot solve anything without fixing the burden on taxpayers. The conversation explains on April 27th of 2020, apparently $1.2 trillion and counting represents bailouts for American companies large and small. And out of those, more than 60% are in the form of grants and financial assistance that will likely become grants. But these funds will never be recovered by taxpayers. This cost will ultimately cost over $400 billion over the next 10 years, and it's only going to increase. But the article continues that taxpayers evidently don't get to make any decisions about where this money goes. They also don't get bailed out when the value of their home suddenly plummets or when they lose their job or retirement funds in an economic maelstrom they did not cause. So yes, Representative Smith, people need to be bailed out, not corporations. I couldn't agree more, but the flaw is this legislation does not do that. This is a necessary argument to understand throughout today's round because you cannot evaluate anyone else's argument without it. Don't believe that the bailout was free of cost. It actually created a monster, a continual shift of taxpayer dollars to the banks. That's why you negate. But in the cycles of debate we've seen, we've basically heard one argument from the affirmation and one argument from the negation. The affirmation claims that this bill will eliminate the problem of buybacks, and the negation tells you it won't. So it seems that in reality, we really don't know anything. Representative Khan, Wong, and Smith all tell you that this bill will help fix the issue of stock buybacks. But until this point, no negative speaker has explained why. Kieran Brettwell of Reuters explains on December 10th of 2015, the money acquired from buybacks mostly find its way back into the hands of executives. This happens on a regular basis. For example, an executive for Humana Incorporated was able to add $1.65 million to her salary through the form of buybacks. Now, Representative Chang, the threat of recession was not only caused by the pandemic, it was actually caused because of legislations like this that don't solve the problem. Even if companies decided to eliminate buybacks, they still ultimately re-enter these large corporations. The benefits of this legislation cannot outweigh the flaws. The problem is that this legislation puts a bandage on a wound that needs to be stitched up. Negate.
Thank you for that speech of exactly 3 minutes. Questioners, raise your placards. Between those, Senator Wong.
Hi, so right now, excessive corporate bailouts lead to burden on taxpayers, correct? Like taxpayers foot the bill.
Yes.
So if we limit the amount of corporations who now qualify for bailouts, will we now decrease like the monster you were talking about?
Sure, but I'm claiming that under this legislation, we're not really decreasing the burden, we're just decreasing the
Why
amount of
not?
companies. Why can't we just pass a legislation that actually solves the
So
burden? that
what's the
allows us
solution
on
if it's not limiting corporate bailout?
Because corporate bailout is what causes the burden on taxpayers. If we eliminate that, we actually can solve the problem sooner.
Yeah.
Senator Gandhi.
Are you saying basically then that these buybacks that they're doing, these corporations, is good for our normal constituents, correct?
No, I'm saying that buybacks, even if they're trying to be removed, they ultimately find their way back into the hands of executives.
Can you explain how?
Yeah, so even when they try to eliminate them, they ultimately added to their salaries, so even companies were able to achieve more.
But today's legislation I don't think it specifically states that we're going to be adding money, like they can add money to their salary. Like
I'm arguing that under today's legislation, it says that the companies cannot engage with stock buybacks. It automatically goes back.
Thank you. The questioning period has elapsed. With that, speakers on the affirmation, raise your placards. Senator Manohar.
Thank the chair. That's Senator Manohar, M-A-N-O-H-A-R. Ready when all the judges are? Just give me an indication if you're not ready. Okay. The previous speaker talked about how today's legislation in today's debate only had 1 point on either side. That is not true at all. So it's time we actually look to see all of the points on both sides and understand why the affirmation wins. Now, first, Senator Nalluri and Senator Lai, they both argue about stock splits and stock buybacks being good. Senator Nalluri talking about just stock splits, Senator Lai talking about both. It's time we put these arguments to rest. First, stock buybacks. The Harvard Business Review reports in January 1st of 2020 that by increasing stock buybacks, what happens is that basically it's false confidence. And when false confidence in the market goes away, what leaves behind is instability, leading to economic instability. Now, what happens as a result is that when companies start losing money due to this instability, the very impact Senator Everard Vesio fears comes to play. Layoffs and a lot of funding going away from companies. What you have to understand is that stock buybacks are a big problem, Senator Lai. Sure, the market value increased, but the stability hasn't. That's what you focus on in today's legislation. Next, let's talk about stock splits. Senator Nalluri, the Washington Post reports on August 6th of 2020 that when you actually analyze stocks, market value is much more important than market price. That's something that she fails to neglect time and time again. Just because a stock is cheaper doesn't mean it's better, doesn't mean it yields better investment. What happens when you do a stock split is no net benefit. Sure, poorer people are able to invest more, but the actual stock doesn't actually increase in value as much. As such, the benefit is outweighed by the cost. Next, let's continue down the line and actually go to Senator Everard Vesio, who talked a lot about small businesses. A couple of pointers here. First, small businesses aren't susceptible to Section 1C of today's legislation. Since last time I checked, most small businesses don't have stocks. But furthermore, what we find is that small businesses are actually able to hold their funding very highly accountable and keep them in the banking system. As such, your concern over small businesses have been met. Section 1A and 1C are completely fulfilled. Finally, let's talk about the negations argument as a whole, about buybacks not exactly working, about bailouts not exactly working. And fine, bailouts do cause a cost on taxpayers, Senator Sudhakar, but that's why you passed today's legislation. Senator Wong asked you this in questioning, and she is completely right. If we limit the amount of bailouts we do, the taxpayers don't have to foot as big of a bill. Your impacts don't stand as well. Today's debate has been very convoluted with a lot of different side tangents. Today, I have put that argument to rest. You vote for the affirmation.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 47 seconds. With that, questioners, raise your placards. Between those standing, Senator Everard Vessia.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I've had one very simple question since the beginning of today's debate. If stock buybacks are so harmful for corporations, why would they do them during a recession?
Right. Again, it's a matter of confidence, right? If a lot of people, Americans aren't particularly smart. So if they see a stock price go up, they think the value is going up and it's something to catch on the hype trade. So
I guess I'm one of those not particularly smart Americans, because if the stock price does go up, it does mean the value is going up, right?
Right, but then after the confidence goes away, it completely collapses.
Senator Lai.
Okay, so do the majority of Americans participate in day trading or active stock trading?
Probably not.
Okay, so false confidence makes stocks more volatile in the short term, right?
No, the false confidence is the short term. The volatility is the long term.
Okay, fine. That's fine. So what's more important? Long-term uptrends, which we've seen since the inception of America, or with stock buybacks, or short-term volatility?
Even though the stock market itself doesn't have a lot of members, the effects of the stock market happen all across the United States. So even if not a lot of people themselves are in the stock market, you still feel the pinch.
Okay,
the question period has elapsed. Speakers on the negation, raise your placards. Once again, looking for speakers on the negation. Seeing none, the chair highly pronounces one-sided debate. Speakers on the affirmation. Senator Gandhi.
I thank the chair. For the judges, my name is Senator Gandhi, spelled G-A-N-T-H-I. Just give me any indication when you're ready for me to begin. And Judge, come on. Yeah, perfect, awesome, okay. Today, we've seen numerous arguments made on both sides of today's debate, but everything boils down to truly two questions: how today's legislation affects the common American and how today's legislation affects our economy. Allow me to show you how both these questions are in favor of the affirmation and why we must pass today's legislation. Now let's go ahead and start off with the two biggest points on the negation side, brought up by Representative Lurie and Representative Lai, who state that stock splits are good for the common man. But allow me to explain how that's completely non-unique. If we look to a New York Times article of September 2020 by Grant Lieber, common American can use applications like Robinhood to buy fractional stocks. What we're basically seeing here today is that Representative Lurie champions the point of how today people can go ahead and buy these stocks at lower prices, meaning more people can get into the market. But there's already applications out there allowing for people to use these to their advantage to get into the market. They don't need to use stock splits. Stock splits don't help the American constituents. In the end, it doesn't help get more people into the market. Now we look at also the negation states how today leads to bailouts, and bailouts cost American money. But in the end, bailouts actually help Americans more. Because if we look at it, bailouts are usually meant for essential companies. For example, back in the day, GM was going through bankruptcy. We went through and bailed them out. In the end, we helped the American constituents. We saved jobs, millions of jobs that can actually go back and help our economy and help our people. So today, when we go ahead and say that bailouts are hurting our economy and costing our Americans money, in the end, they actually help our Americans and in the end, help our economy, which means in the end, we're helping everyone. Now let's go ahead and ask how today's legislation affects our economy. Now, Representative Everard Vessia states how today we're going to be losing liquidity, and I completely agree, because the fact of the matter is that when companies today are losing tons and tons of money. Now, Senator Chang shows how companies are even in huge debt, which makes it even worse because they have less liquidity. Now, Representative Evaressio states how these buybacks help to increase this liquidity because they have more leverage and leads to stability in the stock, meaning that in the end, the stocks are of a higher value. But in the end, that means also that they have to sell the stock at some point to get back that money because their money is stuck and they can't use stocks as a trading bargain. So in the end, what we see is when they go ahead and sell them, according to a Barron's article on March 2019 by Ed Lin, when they sell these stocks, in the end, it leads to a worse result because of the fact that when you sell stocks, you usually see stocks dip further than the gain you actually get in the end. So today, what we're seeing here is that in the end, today's legislation is helping our citizens, helping our economy. And in the end, there's no net consequence to passing today's legislation. Go ahead and stand with me in the affirmation. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 57 seconds. Questioners, raise your placards. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So status quo, are there loopholes within the current bailout system that allow companies to lower wages for their employees if they are receiving a bailout?
Okay, there are loopholes for sure. I don't disagree. But the fact of the matter is, if a person has no job, that's far worse than having a low wage.
No, so I'm just saying that they exist. Within this legislation, is there anything preventing those bailouts from happening, such as within Section 1A, which is talking about the continual operating expenses for the coming 6 months?
Okay, to this section basically just ensures that the companies aren't exploiting the money that we're giving them and making sure
Senator
that—
Naluri.
Okay, so what does Section 1C of today's legislation do?
it doesn't allow for stock splits.
So can you explain to me how, if companies won't receive federal funding if they do a stock split, how today's legislation doesn't incentivize?
What I'm trying to say in the end is, it doesn't matter if they do a stock split. They don't need to do a stock split is what I'm trying to say. It's non-unique. If they don't do a stock split, people can—
How is it non-unique if clearly in the affirmative world, companies will not be able to do stock
We see that very few companies are actually doing stock splits in the actual status quo.
No, I just told you.
That big of a deal today to be debating.
With that, that was the second affirmation speech in a row. I encourage a negation speech. Speakers in the negation, rise. Thank you, Senator Rodriguez.
I thank the chair. Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Rodriguez. Rodriguez spelled R-O-D-R-I-G-U-E-Z. Whenever you're ready. Okay. Do I have anyone who is not ready? Okay, cool. And I'm assuming presiding officer is ready as well. Great. The most dangerous thing we can do as a federal government is have short sight. We cannot have pieces of legislation that see a single problem, a single pandemic, and pass legislation that has decades worth of implications in an attempt to solve it. I urge you all, strike down this piece of legislation before we strike down our economy. It is no secret that the biggest clash point in this debate has been whether or not stock buybacks are beneficial to our economy, with the affirmative saying essentially the same argument, with Senators Manohar, Khan, and Chang all saying that stock buybacks make businesses more fragile and therefore more susceptible to recessions in the future. Whereas negative senators such as Representative Evaressio has argued that it gives businesses more liquidity, which in turn is beneficial. Here's the thing that everyone has been misconstruing. It is not an either or. The negation wins both of these, because here is something everyone has forgotten. Stock buybacks increase investor confidence, which, as the Wall Street Journal explains in October in 2019, that the #1 cause of almost all recessions is investors losing confidence in stocks, pulling out of them, and businesses losing money as a result. But guess what? Stock buybacks actually solve for that problem, with Brian O'Connell from The Street explaining on February 12th of 2020 that whenever a business or corporation is losing investor confidence, the one thing they go to are stock buybacks to make it seem like they're doing better than they actually are, increase investor confidence, and avoid those recessions. So every single affirmative impact about how this legislation prevents recessions and makes sure they aren't as bad as usual, I wholly disagree with that, because that is far from the truth. Banning stock buybacks means companies lose this strategy, and recessions are only more often. Economic booms will not happen whatsoever, and our economy struggles as a whole. Second, let's talk about small businesses, because this point has been completely ignored by the affirmative and has been won by the negation. Take a look all the way to Senator Ivar Vessio's first negation speech, where he explained that small businesses are going to be hit hard by this because they won't have enough money to have actual operating expenses in banks. Now, there's been very little refutation in this, with the only refutation coming from Senator Chang, who explains that with this legislation, that won't be a problem because most small businesses are not considered corporations. I have something to bring up about that. The latest census data from 2010 found that 20% of all small businesses are identified as corporations, meaning they fall under the jurisdiction of this legislation. Even if you think that's not a majority, 20% of small businesses unable to get loans or relief is a lot of small businesses, and that is going to hit hard for our economy. This legislation only ensures small businesses struggle, recessions are more common, and the bottom 99% struggle. Because just because we want to demonize the top 1% and say they are the cause of all of our problems, we can't bring down the rest of our nation. I urge you, fail this bill because of that.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 6 seconds. Questioners, raise your placards. Senator Manahar.
You talk about how stock buybacks increase confidence, right? And I agree in the short term, but what have we seen time and time again happen in the long run once the confidence wears off?
It repeats the cycle. Investor confidence
No,
goes up.
it
Corporations
causes
start to
volatility and market collapse. That's
Right,
what
and
happened in 2008.
I disagree with that. Corporations start to do well once investor confidence goes back up, and if it ever goes back down, they simply buy more stock buybacks.
Right, but that causes a lot more volatility. That's what the Harvard Business Review article said.
The volatility doesn't equal recession. Like just because the economy is volatile.
Okay, so most small businesses don't engage in buybacks the way that large ones do, right?
When I was talking about small businesses, I wasn't referring to buybacks. I was referring to Section 1.
They're corporations, but small corporations are still less likely to participate in buybacks. Doesn't that give them more of a competitive edge when applying for bailouts?
Sure, but that doesn't change the fact that they still need operating expenses in banks, which many of them
Right.
cannot.
I already explained that when you're in bankruptcy, you do use banks. But let's move on to investor confidence, right? If you need investor confidence to get buybacks, and then you need buybacks to get investor confidence, doesn't that just create a bubble that's going to pop?
Thank you. The question
just doesn't. It increases.
Just a note, please remember to cut yourself off exactly at 30 seconds. Senator Ivar Vescio, is that a motion?
Yes, Mr. President. I move to the previous question.
Seconds. All those in favor? Any opposed? Clearly, this motion does pass. We're going to be in voting procedures. I'm going to call on everybody who wishes to pass this legislation. Raise your placard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those against. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any abstentions? There shouldn't be. On a vote of 6-5, this legislation does pass. Congratulations to the author. Senator Khan.
Seeing a natural break in debate, I move for a 10-minute recess.
Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? This motion does pass. Please be back at 3:19 Eastern time. Translate that as you will.
Before we go, can we get a split?
Splits?
Or like at least an author?
Yeah, let's do splits. Can we do? Oh, everyone left. Nice.
Yeah, so is anyone here planning on sponsoring the next bill? Okay,
I
cool.
would like to sponsor it if no one else does.
Okay, wait. Can we see if you have an AF? Like, just raise your hand or something. Okay, then we probably have a pretty good split. Well, how is a neg then? We don't have a neg. We have 2 negs.
Either. I'll prep the neg.
Okay, if you guys have like if you guys can go either way, neg might be the way to go.
Can I ask, does anyone actually have anything on meatpacking? I don't think we'll get to it, but
No.
I would prefer that we don't debate meatpacking.
I think the session ends at 4:15 Eastern, so that gives us an hour and 5 minutes. I think we'll cut it pretty like.
Yeah, we'll be
10
fine.
All right. 3:19, everybody. Hey, we have a minute left, so if everybody who's at their computer could turn on their camera, that'd be great. Waiting on just Senator Lai, I think. So we will wait the additional 40 seconds. Awesome. All right, the recess has elapsed. We are now back in session. We're moving on to debate on a legislation called a bill to eliminate payroll tax holidays. Is there an author or a sponsor? Between those, it'll go to Senator.
Thank you. For the second time this session, I'm still Senator Wong, WONG, given the sponsorship, and any indication whenever you're ready is perfect. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Ma'am. Great, I'll pin the PO and we can begin. I understand that the term payroll tax holiday sounds really pleasant, but when we actually delve into the connotation of not the term, but the policy, you will realize it is anything but pleasant. Pass my legislation to reverse its negative effects. Right off the bat, I'd like to place a framework on today's debate. Evaluate payroll tax holidays on its long-term effects. So now let's get into the issue. CNBC tells us in August of this year that in the wake of the pandemic, President Trump signed an executive order that called for the temporary deferral of employee shares of the payroll tax for workers who make no more than $4,000 per biweekly pay period or $104,000 per year. Workers and employers currently split that tax, and each party shoulders a 6.2% Social Security tax and a 1.45% Medicare tax. Here's the issue. If the employer stops collecting the tax and gives the money to the employee, the worker could wind up owing the IRS next year. Forgiveness isn't guaranteed. What that means is that workers who see an increase to their paycheck this fall could see double the Social Security tax withheld from their paychecks at the start of 2021 in order to pay back the deferral. But there's also a second problem. Who actually qualifies for the payroll tax holiday in the first place? The Center for Budget Policy and Priorities tells us that too little of the benefit goes to lower income households struggling to make ends meet, and too much goes to higher income taxpayers who are likely to save a significant fraction of any new resources they receive. So before negative speakers inevitably tell you that payroll tax cuts or deferrals benefit Americans, realize that that's not the case. When most of the money is going towards these higher earners, you only exacerbate income inequality. That's the impact that I present to you in today's debate. My legislation is a simple fix. Section 1 states the reductions or deferrals of the payroll tax are no longer going to be allowed. What that means is that instead of only providing benefits for higher income earners, we now are able to implement different types of policies that are actually going to address everyday Americans who are suffering under the pandemic. Understand that we can't implement short-sighted legislation like the payroll tax deferral with only short-term circumstances in mind. At the end of the day, when you're actually weighing arguments from the affirmation and the negation, realize that with long-term effects, the payroll tax holiday is undoubtedly a bad idea. Support my legislation.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 46 seconds. We're gonna have 4 questioning blocks. With that, questioners, raise your placards. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair. So I actually want to go back to section 1. It says that except through a subsequent act of Congress, no reduction or suspension of the payroll tax shall be permitted through the executive action or by an executive agency. So it's not saying that we're getting rid of payroll taxes. It's saying
so
that
we're
taking
preventing the
power from
executive order that Trump did in August.
Yeah, but your impacts are weighing payroll tax good or bad,
I mean,
not
I would say that it
branch.
just prohibits like the executive branch from creating these orders in the first place.
Okay, thank you.
The chair will absorb the remaining 2 seconds. There are 3 more questioning blocks. Would anybody like to take them? Senator Manahar.
Let's discuss long-term impacts, right? That you've discussed. What are the long-term impacts of payroll tax holidays? Could you please clarify?
Yeah, so it doesn't actually guarantee that, like, even though now like their taxes are being deferred, they're still gonna owe them the following year. So you're increasing the burden in the long term. There's no, like nowhere in the policy like
Can you be
doesn't state
confident that this Congress in future legislation will give them forgiveness as well as the holiday?
I mean, sure, but that's separate.
Remember,
legislation that you-
payroll tax will be done by Congress in the affirmative.
Thank you. Senator Rodriguez.
So this legislation would block President Trump's executive order to implement a payroll tax holiday this year, right?
Correct.
So considering the fact that even though people might have to pay extra in the future, wouldn't they have additional income as the effects of COVID are now ramping down?
I mean, I would argue the problem is that the people who qualify for this like payroll tax deduction in the first place aren't the people who need it the most. They're high income earners.
Sure. Lower income Americans might receive less, but isn't any reduction still better than no
That's a
reduction?
problem. If low income earners aren't receiving the benefits, then
But
we need to change.
under this, if you fail this
The
bill,
questioning period has elapsed. Senator Smith, would you like to go again?
I would, thank you, Chair.
Here.
All right, so I just have a couple more questions. So with payroll taxes, is it necessary to have the employees being the one to pay it back coming the next tax year? I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Oh, I apologize. Could you repeat that?
Okay, so within payroll tax, we get to choose if we pass this legislation that Congress is the one who is now in control of payroll tax.
Right. So
Does
you
it
can
say
choose to
anywhere
not
within the
implement that policy.
Yeah. Does it say
You're
anywhere?
shifting the power from the executive to the legislative branch, and I'm hoping you
The
support
questioning
me
period
not.
has elapsed. Speakers on the negation, raise your placard. Once again, calling for speakers on the negation. We need balanced debate. This is the finals round. Somebody on the negation, please.
Mr. President, I move for a 2-minute in-house recess.
Are there any objections? Without objection. Does anybody have a negation speech that they could give?
Wait, didn't 2 people say that they had negation speeches when we were doing a split? At least 2.
I'm prepping mine.
Mr. President, I once again move for a 2-minute in-house recess.
Any objections? Seeing no objections, this does pass. Does anybody have a negation speech that they can prep in the next 2 minutes?
So we have a third piece of legislation on the docket. Who wants
Wait.
to talk about meat packing?
I'm just slightly confused because when we were in recess, it seemed like there was a balanced debate. Did like something change?
I wasn't aware that you guys took a split during recess. I must have been gone during that point.
I mean, even then we had 2 people. Like I have bad presence, so I was planning to I was writing a refutation speech. So I don't have any.
Okay, wait, so who doesn't have a prepared speech on this piece of legislation? So then do we have like 8 AFs?
Oh, okay.
Try to
If
phrase
you're AF,
not just like we would in 2 minutes though.
I mean, I was AF, but I guess I'll flip right now. It's not going to be ready next cycle, but I can go as fast as I can.
Okay, let's just do a split right now to see where we're at. Who has an AF speech that they are is already prepared and that they want to give?
I think the problem is, don't we need a negative speech to continue?
Yeah, but we're just going to go through the round. So we have 3 AF speakers. Okay, who has a neg speech that they want to
I
give
have
or
that.
can prepare? Wait, Representative Arches, you have an AF or a neg?
I have an AF.
Okay, so we have 4 AFs. Who has a neg or can prepare a neg?
I will prepare one now.
Okay.
Okay. Can anybody give this first negation speech so we can actually start with the round? We have 20 seconds left in the recess, by the way. Keep that into account.
I think the option is
Extend it 2
we take a
minutes.
5-minute recess, and hopefully someone can come up with a speech in 7 minutes total time.
Before we do that, I just want to confer with the parliamentarian that would be okay, right? If we take a 5-minute recess to ensure that we have negation speeches.
That would be fine. I mean, you guys set the docket, so I mean, I'm always surprised when there's like everyone's surprised, like we have to give speeches. Like, go ahead.
All right. Definitely undesirable. With that, we're back.
I will give an extemporaneous next speech right now, just so that we don't need to do recess. That's completely fine.
Thank you very much, Senator Smith. With that, speakers on the negation, raise your placard. Senator Smith, thank you very much.
I thank the chair. Second time I've had to flip sides, but that is all good. Speaking in a little bit earlier than I thought, but always happy to speak. Judges all ready? PO, all good? All right. Representatives, sometimes reading between the lines isn't necessary. You just need to read what's on front of you in the paper. This piece of legislation, we are not discussing whether or not we should have payroll taxes, who should be liable for paying money back after those taxes have been levied, or whether or not payroll taxes are good or bad for our constituents. We are literally just focusing on who should hold the power for enabling payroll taxes. Now, once again, I draw your attention to section 1 of this bill. It says, except through subsequent action of Congress, payroll taxes are not allowed to be levied by the executive branch. Now, status quo, what's happening right now, the executive branch is able to levy payroll taxes at any time that they want, just like President Donald Trump just did with a payroll tax extending from September 1st of this year all the way to December 31st. Now, that tax is going to be paid back by either companies or employees before April 31st of 2021. And that tax is not what we're debating. We're debating who should have the power to yield it. And it's for the reason that Congress needs to be the one yielding that power. It's for the reason that the executive branch is the one that needs to be the one yielding that power that I negate this legislation. So first, Representative Wong, Senator Wong, you just came up and were talking about the long-term effects of payroll taxes and about how employees are the ones that are going to need to pay it back later in the next coming fiscal year for taxes. But that's not true. As Congress, as Congress and the federal government and the executive branch, we are able to decide who pays back the payroll tax at the end of the year. Because yes, we do need that 12% Social Security payback by the end of the next fiscal year of taxes, but we don't necessarily need it coming from our employees. When we put that power into the executive branch with input from Congress and a vetoing power, we make sure that our different departments of government are able to have the same power and decide what is best for the constituencies together. We get to say that no, we shouldn't have our employees being burdened next year by having an increased amount of paying back however much additional salary they earned the past year. We can tell corporations that they are the ones paying that back, preventing our constituents and our employees of companies within the United States from having that burden that Representative Wong is so concerned about. But moving on to the second point. Senator Wong was talking about how this payroll tax is distributed unevenly to the wealthy, but we're not talking about payroll taxes. We're talking about who has the power to levy them. And when we put that power within Congress and the executive branch, two branches of our government, we are enabling us to have that checks and balance system. If we pass this legislation, we are putting it solely in the hands of Congress. And whichever bipartisan polarized way Congress is leading is the way that is going to be most benefited. Republicans historically have been able to prop up the higher percentages and create additional corporate taxes. Democrats have been more on the socialist side of things, where they are having even distribution of wealth. Payroll taxes in the future are just going to be up to whichever side is holding Congress, Democrat or Republican. And we can't let that type of power hold just within one type of government without a vetoing power from the executive branch. For those reasons, we negate.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. We're gonna have 4 questioning blocks. Questioners, raise your placards. Between those, Senator Wong.
Wait, so hold on. Can Congress do anything about executive orders?
Congress with executive orders is allowed to put them on.
The answer is no. So is it better to have all the power in one person, the executive, or split between two chambers, like as Congress?
So I know that with our current political structure, with the current administration, a lot of people who lean to the right like to say
regardless of that.
everything is up to the decision of one person, President Donald Trump. That is not true. It is the executive branch. We don't want all of the power
So
within
if this legislation shifts it so that there's power from Congress to actually levy the tax.
Senator Ebrard Besio.
So President Trump just made history with the payroll tax holiday, right? By just unilaterally changing the tax code as the executive, correct?
Yep.
So if this Congress does nothing, what type of precedent does it set when we say it's okay if the executive just changes the power of the purse and takes it over?
No, Congress isn't doing nothing. Congress is saying that we value each branch of our government. We don't say that any part of our government
But
is
here's the problem. Isn't it inherently a congressional power to change taxes, not a presidential one?
Senator Lai.
Okay, checks and balances are important, right?
Agreed.
Okay, we should keep Congress and the executive branch separate, right?
Disagree.
So they need to be one thing, that we shouldn't have a Congress and an executive?
For a successful government, you need them to work together with the best interest of both constituents.
Right, but they can't be having, they can't have the same jobs, right? Otherwise we
No,
completely throw out the
that's why you have
Constitution.
distribution of power, yes, federal government.
Okay, under the Constitution, doesn't it explicitly give the powers of taxation only to Congress?
Powers of taxation just strictly to Congress. I would want
One more questioning period. Would anybody like to take it? I'm advising somebody take this last questioning period. Senator Wong.
So why is it a good thing that like now, like the executive branch has all this power to unilaterally change the tax code?
So first,
what can we do about it?
Yep. So first, when the executive branch is the one with the shareholder of power, that is allowing it to make more decisive, faster decisions.
Okay,
And
Congress cannot do anything to overturn executive orders. All that power is concentrated in a single executive. Isn't that a
Congress-
problem?
Okay, so it's not within a single executive, it's within the executive branch. Trump,
Sure,
of course, in the Trump administration, any executive has advisors. Those advisors' job is to have this role. This is a job currently of the executive.
Has elapsed. Just a note, if you'd like to ask a question, raise your placard as soon as you can. Senator Manahar, I saw you, apologies, but that was after I called him Senator Wong. With that, speakers on the affirmation, rise. Senator, okay. I'm going to give a second. Everybody who's raising your placard, please raise it up to the camera. Between those, it's going to go to Senator Naluri.
I thank the chair. For the judges, that is Senator Naluri speaking for the second time today. Please give me any indication when you're ready and I'll go ahead and get started. I will be timing myself once again. Oops, give me 1 second. A payroll tax holiday may have been created with good intentions, but its impact has been nothing but detrimental to society and our economy. We passed today's legislation because a payroll tax holiday creates more economic strain than it helps fix. Now, I would like to break down the several economic components of today's legislation and show why a payroll tax holiday actually hurts Americans in the long run. Now, Senator Smith was concerned with today's legislation because it stops the executive branch from implementing a payroll tax holiday. But let me show you why doing just that is so important, because the current payroll tax holiday system that the executive branch did implement is so economically infeasible. But before I do that, I would like to clarify a major assumption on this issue, that a payroll tax holiday actually saves Americans money. According to the Society for Human Resources and Management, in August of 2020, a payroll tax holiday is more like a deferral than an actual holiday. This is because the taxes that Americans are exempt from this September to December under a quote unquote payroll tax holiday, they actually have to pay back the following year just at a double rate from January to April. What this means is that there is no difference in money between a payroll tax holiday and a regular payroll tax. The only difference is that Americans pay their taxes at double the rate later on. And let's see why that's bad. This actually hurts Americans in the long run because Americans don't want a payroll tax holiday system, and two, aren't financially savvy enough to actually be able to understand that they have to pay for this payroll tax later on in the future. According to the New York Times in September of 2020, since President Trump imposed this system, no major company has actually put it into implementation because of how economically complicated it is. This leaves this only large employer that currently implements this system as the federal government because it's forced to. But we see that most current federal employees want to opt out of this deferral system. Now, this is because most Americans are not economically knowledgeable enough to handle this tax. Now, many of the people today's legislation impacts are young federal civilians that come just out of high school or college, who are living paycheck to paycheck and don't actually know that under this system, they will have to pay off the payroll tax later on at an even higher rate. What this means is that when times comes when they have to pay off this payroll tax, they won't be prepared, and that'll hurt our economy in the long term. Next, I would like to take the negation on its highest ground today and assume that this payroll tax system actually will work with Americans. But we see that the actual mechanics of a payroll tax system won't work in terms of numbers. According to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in March of 2020, under this system, workers receive small monetary benefits that would have been payroll tax cuts. But we see that these small benefits are so small that they don't actually boost our economy in the long term. We would actually need a stimulus check. People don't want a payroll tax holiday and aren't equipped to properly deal with it. Negate.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 9 seconds. Questioners, raise your placards. Senator Manahar.
What is this legislation actually doing?
So it's stopping the executive branch from implementing a payroll tax holiday system.
Right. So how does any argument about the actual existence of a payroll tax actually affect the debate? Because it's just a power shift from president to Congress.
That's the thing, though. The president is implementing the system regardless of the fact that it isn't economically working, which is why we need to take the power out of his hands and pass today's.
But how can you guarantee future Congress won't do the same?
Because we know that the system doesn't work.
Thank you, Chair. So I actually want to talk a little bit about a question that I was asked previously. Can Congress overturn an executive order?
Sure, yes.
Yes, they can through legislation. So we, status quo, have the ability to stop any harmful payroll taxes to our constituents.
Yes, but with that power,
no, that's just a yes or no question. So let me ask the follow-up. So if that's what we're debating, whether or not Congress or the executive branch have power over creating and installing payroll taxes, not whether or not payroll taxes are good or bad for our constituents, how do any of your affirmations points still stand?
The questioning period has elapsed. Just a reminder, there is no grace period for questioning. Please stop right when I say. With that, speakers on the negation, raise your placard. Senator Manahar.
I thank the chair. I quickly prepared this in order to bring balance to the debate. I stand at the leisure of all those above me. Please give me a smile, nod, or any indication when you wish for me to begin. A lot of times people argue that misinformation is the enemy of real discourse. But it seems as if the affirmation is constantly getting misinformed about what this legislation is, what it's meant to do, and what the payroll tax is allowed to actually supposed to do. Let me shed light into this debate one more time. First, understand that payroll tax cuts are critical if they are timely, which is why the power should be vested with the president. But secondly, we must understand the actual benefit and purpose of payroll taxes and why the previous affirmation arguments begin to fall. But first, why should the power be vested with the president of the United States? That's the core of this debate. That's something that neither Senator Nalluri nor Senator Wong actually touched upon. What the core of this debate is, why should the power be vested with the president? Allow me to answer. The National Bureau of Economic Research has published a study in August of 2020, which says that payroll cuts, while they don't actually generate new revenue for small businesses, they actually make them more resilient to economic failures. But the only way that happens is if they are extremely quickly implemented. As such, that power must be vested with the president, he or she can quickly decide when a payroll tax happens, and as such, the speed is what is the most paramount factor. That's why this argument goes to the affirmation, goes to the negation, because the president of the United States is the one who can be able to implement a payroll tax holiday quickly and effectively. This is something that is further brought up in a Forbes article on September 11th of 2020, just yesterday, that in order for small businesses to be able to be resilient to recessions, they have to have quick, fast tax cuts. But next, let's go through the arguments of the affirmation and begin to decipher where the misunderstandings lie. Now, Senator Nalluri said, we actually don't give the small businesses and low-income constituents money. I agree, we don't. The point of a payroll tax isn't to give them more money. It's to give them a temporary breather so they don't collapse right now. Because at the end of the day, if they don't get a tax cut right now, they won't have a roof over their house tomorrow. That's the purpose of a payroll tax. It isn't meant to alleviate stress in the long term. That's why Senator Wong's framework is completely flawed. Payroll taxes are a short-term solution. Why are we judging it on a long-term metric? Furthermore, Senator Wong, she claimed that payroll tax cuts don't affect low-income constituents as much. The reason is because their taxes are smaller because they have lower income. That's why they save less money, because there's less tax getting cut. What you have to understand at the end of the day is that today's debate is about the president's power to implement a payroll tax, because speed is the most paramount factor, and because the affirmations argument simply don't hold. That's why you fail.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 3 seconds. Just to note, if we ever have tech issues like we did there, I'll have you restart, or I'll defer to the parliamentarian if that issue is longer than 10 seconds. If it was brief like it was this time, it won't be a problem. With that, questioners, please raise your placards. Senator Lai.
Okay, Representative, as congressmen, we have to upload the Constitution, right? We're sworn to. Okay. In the Constitution, doesn't it say that only Congress has the ability to levy and collect taxes?
Right, but here's the deal. We're dealing with an emergency scenario. So
okay, can't Congress function effectively in an emergency still because the Constitution says we should?
I mean, here's the thing. Congress has been very slow and bureaucratic. As such, we can't get the tax out fast enough.
Isn't that what the Constitution mandates?
Then we simply control the president, like in future legislation. We tell about the tax holiday.
So let's talk about the status quo. Currently, everyone working in the federal government and the people whose today's legislation actually impacts don't want this payroll tax cut system, but the president is still implementing it. So why should we let him continue to implement a system?
This legislation isn't native President Trump. Regardless, in 5 years, President Trump is going to be out of office. We shouldn't base our arguments on him.
That's not what I'm saying. Currently, the executive branch can't be trusted implementing the system. We see that
the question period has elapsed. With that, speakers on the affirmation, raise your placard. Between those, Senator Khan.
I thank the chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Senator Isaac Khan, speaking for the second and hopefully last time today. As usual, just a signal whenever you're ready would be awesome. Thank you. Great, wonderful, fantastic. And PO ready?
Yeah, just one thing, Senator Nalluri, that's granted.
Awesome. Earlier this month, our Congress effectively became an SNL skit when we voted by mail to bar Americans from voting by mail. But I think that in today's debate, I found a better candidate to showcase the irony of American politics. Pass this legislation to give this Congress its political voice back. Representative Smith and Manohar right off the bat told you that giving the executive branch the power to oversee the payroll tax is a good thing. That's fundamentally wrong, because if you're actually paying attention to the status quo, like Mr. Evar Vesio was in cross-examination, you'd see that congressional oversight is lacking in executive decisions over the payroll tax. The US News tells us literally 2 days ago that after failing to get a payroll tax through this Congress, President Trump imposed a series of executive orders that tried to force the Secretary of Treasury to suspend payroll taxes. The world that Representative Smith describes to you with executive power over the payroll tax actually exists. It's called the status quo, and congressional approval doesn't exist in it. That's the first reason for you to affirm. Give this chamber back its oversight. Here's where the issue lies. The executive doesn't actually have the authority to eliminate the tax, but instead utilizes loopholes that are extremely problematic with the Treasury Department. The entire point of this legislation is to allow of this very chamber to engage in discourse exactly like we are right now in order to determine future legislative action. Failing this legislation and standing with Ms. Smith takes away our right to make decisions through the exact same process that we're partaking in right now. The negation is actively voting to silence themselves and the rest of the affirmation speakers. And I don't know whether this is more ironic or the fact that negative speakers argue that they're helping Americans. Representative Manohar would sacrifice his ability to advocate in order to have hasty decisions. And that's not an opportunity cost that I'm willing to pay. But let's take the negation on their highest ground and say, sure, the executive should control payroll taxes. Here's where things get really problematic for them. What happens if we actually cut payroll taxes like Representative Manohar and Smith want us to do today? Well, the second reason for you to affirm is to protect low-income and minority Americans, not just today, but in the future. If you're worried about taxation, Representative Smith, pay close attention because the effects of our negligence are staggering. The Washington Post tells us that 29 million Americans are receiving jobless aid since August 22nd. And here's why the payroll tax matters more than ever, Representative Manohar. The Washington Post continues that the payroll tax funds Social Security, Medicare, and unemployment welfare, all of which have seen exponential increases in demand because of the coronavirus. Allowing the executive to sabotage these programs with a payroll tax isn't just irresponsible, it's dangerous. Do not sacrifice our welfare programs at the expense of haste. Fight for your voice. Pass this legislation.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 53 seconds. Questioners, raise your placard. Senator Rodriguez.
Hi, so when people don't have to pay this payroll tax because of a payroll tax holiday, they pay it in the future, right?
Yes.
So how do we lose Social Security funding if it's going to be paid back eventually?
Right, because the funds are delayed by so much that it can't keep up with the exponentially increasing demand in the status quo.
Right, but the average American doesn't receive their Social Security benefits until decades down the line. Wouldn't that be enough time to pay it back?
So that's actually why you should look to the third benefit, which is the unemployment taxes, which have provided 20 million Americans with benefits since.
But we're not going to just lose all of the funding.
I'm a bit concerned about my voice as well, but what prevents this Congress from passing legislation in the future, effectively forcing President Trump to end the payroll tax, similar to how today's legislation is, where we can just say the payroll tax holiday ends now? Why can't
That doesn't make any legislative sense, because if you're going to pass legislation in the future to repeal what this legislation does, don't pass it at all. Save us some time.
I'm saying don't pass this legislation.
Yeah, but exactly. Why we pass is to give us a voice in order to be able to do that. When
You
you
still-
take
this
our
legislation
voice out of
is
it,
fair.
then we aren't able to do that anymore.
Senator Naluri, your point of personal privilege is granted. Just a general note to the chamber, please use the honorifics. You guys are senators. Please use that when referring to each other. With that, speakers on the negation, please rise. Senator Chang.
I thank the chair. My name is Senator Chang, spelled C-H-A-N-G. If anyone's not ready, please give me any sort of verbal cue. Okay. Policy doesn't happen in a oh, excuse me, sorry, I forgot to start my stopwatch. May I begin again? All right, thank you. Policy doesn't happen in a vacuum. Our job as Congress is to make sure speed is of the essence, but we often fail at doing that, which is why we rely on the executive branch. Negate today's bill, but first, let's understand where the affirmation goes wrong. Payroll tax holidays aren't just tax deferrals. There are multiple different types of holidays, such as the one proposed in 2011 by President Obama, which was not a deferral of the tax holiday, but actually a payroll tax forgiveness. It lowered the payroll tax from 6.2% to 4.2% for everyday Americans and businesses, and that was really beneficial. So first, let's negate today's bill because we can help everyday Americans under a payroll tax. We can help employed Americans. Senator Manohar was correct when he said we need room to breathe immediately. That's why we go through the executive branch. That's why previous payroll tax holidays have all been proposed by the president. The Bureau of Economic Analysis found in January of 2013 that the 2011 Obama payroll tax holiday increased disposable income by $114 billion a year and was worth over $1,000 to the average family. So we see it helps employed Americans, but it also helps unemployed Americans at a time when the New York Times tells us on August 27th of this year, 30 million Americans are unemployed. Well, in 2012, Larry Seidman, an economist at the University of Delaware, found that the 2011 payroll tax decreased unemployment by 1% and expanded private sector employment by $2.4 million. 2.4 million workers. When we give businesses room to breathe, when we reduce the burden on them, they're able to hire more workers, and that helps the economy. Because second, we negate today's bill because payroll taxes actually lead to long-term economic benefits. First, let's understand why payroll tax holidays give more benefits to the middle and upper class people. That's because according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, upper class and middle class people who get extra money invest and save it. That's the investment that Senator Lai was so fond of last debate. But what we need to understand is that when Senator Wong says that payroll tax holidays don't result in a stimulus, she's actually wrong. First, because middle and upper class people invest their money, that yields greater returns down the road. But second, when we actually spend money, when we go into a deficit, we set ourselves up for long-term economic success. So The Economist reports on April 23rd of this year that according to the theory of John Maynard Keynes, when lower income workers spend more money because of money they've gained from tax cuts, temporary fiscal deficits actually jumpstart the economy. So we saw this in the 2011 payroll tax holiday, where the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities found September 2013 that it had increased GDP growth by 1%. I understand that representatives on the affirmation like Senator Khan don't want to go into a deficit, but sometimes the best way to dig ourselves out of a hole, the best way to get to recovery is to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support everyday Americans, that we're doing everything we can to support our businesses, and we'll see that it pays off in the long run. We need to take action now, and we need to take action quickly, which is why we must negate today's bill.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Questioners, raise your placard. Between those, Senator Evrar-Vescio.
Thank you. So what does upward mobility look like in the United States?
Okay, so again, I'm not claiming this that payroll tax holidays solve everything, but what I will tell you is that according to the Congressional Budget Office in September,
this has nothing to do with my
tax
question.
cuts
It's
that are
upward
geared,
mobility.
may I answer? Tax cuts that are geared towards lower income and middle income people only return a third in economic growth of what they cost because they're not investing or able to save
Yeah,
it.
exactly. But shouldn't we be more worried about people who can't even invest in the first place, like our low
And I'm
income?
telling you that it's worth about $1,000 to the average family if we go through a forgiveness program.
Senator Khan.
Hi, so notwithstanding long-term benefits, let's look at right now when we're actually trying to prevent President Trump from implementing a payroll tax. How can you justify allowing him to cut unemployment benefits for millions so we can see a 1% increase in GDP in the next 10 years?
Okay, can I answer that? First of all, I would argue we need to think long-term, not short-term. But second of all, if you're really concerned about that, we can end payroll tax holiday deferrals. But I think payroll tax holidays that forgive tax credits is actually incredibly helpful, both in the
So why don't you just pass and allow us to do that? Give us the power
Thank
to
you.
do
The
that by
question
giving us
period has elapsed. With that, speakers on the affirmation, raise your placard. Senator Evrar-Vescio.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the judges, my name is Michael Evrar-Vescio. I'm speaking for the second time today. I don't know if it helps you find my ballot. I spoke second on the last piece of legislation. Any indication when you're ready? I'll be happy to begin. Checking the screen. Is anyone not ready? Perfect. Gary is a 65-year-old loving father of three who's been paying the payroll tax for over 40 years, holding on to the promise that Social Security will ensure a comfortable retirement. Unfortunately, this promise is just empty words on a blank check that, due to Social Security's impending demise, Americans may never be able to cash. Today, let's actually put ourselves in the shoes of Gary and the millions of Americans like him to understand why a payroll tax holiday is nothing to celebrate. First, let's file our taxes, but it seems that the government has already done it for us. As Senator Wong explained, a payroll tax holiday is really like a forced government loan that people have to repay in the future. Senator Smith and Manohar respond by saying we should just pass legislation to avoid this. But not only is that argument circumstantial, it's inconsequential. According to CNBC on September 9th, workers who earn less than $8,000 a week, the majority of American employees, can't opt out of the payroll tax holiday. So any negative advocacy about permanently deferring the tax payback isn't feasible because nearly every American gets the deferral, whether they want it or not. This is quite literally taxation without representation. Senator Chang advocates for this executive action, but changing the tax code unilaterally makes our president more like a king than an elected leader. I admire the negative's willingness to acknowledge for our retirees, but their plan is far from revolutionary, but rather more resemblant of a colossal colonial era charge. Now that Gary has paid his dues, let's see what he's going to get out of the Social Security system to repay. But let's take Senator Manohar at his highest ground, where Americans aren't required to repay. Senator Rodriguez furthers this by saying people can pay it in the future, but in reality, they won't pay it at all. Nancy Altman, president of Social Security Works, explains, if a payroll tax holiday is put in place, Social Security would run out of funds by 2023, just 3 years from now, as Americans wouldn't repay their deferral because they lack the money to do so. What would the elimination of Social Security look like for our beneficiaries? USA Today gives us the answer in March of 2019. Because if Social Security failed, its recipients would receive just $42 a month. That's less than the minimum wage. It certainly isn't a livable wage. And for future retirees like Gary, it makes a difference between a comfortable retirement and financial disaster. Social Security is hanging on by a thread. Passing this legislation prevents President Trump from cutting the string. Today, I debate for Gary Vesio, my father. But I ask you, who do you debate for? Is it a parent or grandparent, a brother or sister, or even your children decades into the future? Do what is in their best interests and affirm this bill.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 1 second. Questioners, raise your placard. Senator Gandhi.
All right, I'm a bit confused here today. So you're stating how if we're deferring taxes that they would normally be paying, we're taking away their right of representation. Can you explain how this whole thing works?
No, I'm saying you're taking away the right of representation when the president, who wasn't elected to have the power of the purse, now gets to decide the tax code.
Okay, but what's happening is they're just giving a payday holiday. They would normally be paying this normal taxes normally. It's just they're paying it in a lump sum at the end, which means they can use that to go ahead and maybe gain interest.
As I explained later, they won't repay.
So I think it was Senator Rodriguez that actually said we shouldn't pass policy with long-lasting impacts based on one problem. So if we're basing this off of the Trump payroll tax holiday, why are we banning payroll tax holidays altogether when they've been proven to improve our economy?
Read the legislation. It says Congress in the future can implement payroll tax
Right,
holidays.
but Congress takes such a long time. Look at how long it's taken us to debate this bill.
We take a long time, but we get the
Social
job done.
Security is going to be insolvent in either world, right? So why not at least try to make
And
sure
the
our economy
negative
has the
thing-
best chance of succeeding? So
In the affirmation world, Social Security is insolvent in 2035.
Thank you. Your questioning
In your
period
world, it's
has
insolvent in
elapsed.
3 years.
Speakers on the negation, raise your placard. Speakers on the negation. Senator Sudhakar, my apologies.
I thank the chair. That's Representative Sudhakar speaking for the second time this legislative session. Speaking on the negation, judges, give me any indication when you're ready. Good, good, good. Perfect. In a time of a global pandemic, extreme polarization, and the perpetual failure of this chamber, it is time for this Congress to come together and create a solution that impacts every single American. But it is because today's legislation fails to accomplish that we must stand in the negation. So first, Senator Vesio told you that it harms employees, but employees in the status quo can already choose to opt out of the program if they wanted to. As Marketplace explains on July 22nd of 2020, the notice does not give employees a say in opting in and out of the payroll deferral, but it provides flexibilities for employers to provide that option to employees. And so a lot of employers are looking to put in place an election for employees as a part of this process. But Representative Wong says it doesn't benefit every single American. It only benefits the upper class. But under today's legislation, even if it only benefits the upper class, everyone is still able to have an impact in some way. But second, Senator Naluri tells you that it creates more economic strain. This is categorically false. Payroll taxes are an effective way to make money. As Kilpinger explains, under the president's executive order, your share of Social Security taxes won't be taken out of your paycheck if your pre-tax bi-weekly salary is $4,000 or less. So, for example, someone making $10 per hour and working 40 hours per week will get about $25 more per week, or around $100 more per month. From September through December, that will add up to about $446. A full-time worker making $15 per hour would get approximately $37 more per week, $100 more per month, and $670 more by the end of the year. For someone making $25 per hour, the savings will be about $62 per week and $284 per month. But let's look at Representative Wong's argument when she says it doesn't make sense to keep the payroll taxes if it's only benefiting one class. On a larger scale, proponents of a payroll tax that argue that it only doesn't help the economy can subsequently benefit on a broad swath of Americans, even those who aren't even in the workforce. Employers have already had the ability to defer their notion of Social Security taxes under the CARES Act for the remainder of the year. Today's legislation does absolutely nothing to solve the inherent flaws of a bill. Understand, in today's debate, there's no answer but the negation.
Thank you for that speech of 2 minutes and 33 seconds. Questioners, raise your placard. Senator Wong.
Senator, so under the current executive order, who qualifies to receive the payroll tax holiday deferral?
Yeah, so under the bill, it actually says based on your policy, it can actually,
I'm not talking about the bill. I'm talking about President Trump's executive order. So I'll give you the answer. It's people who make $104,000 a year. How is that impacting?
Even if it's all based on whether
what is it benefiting low-income Americans?
I'm saying based on what your income is, that determines how much money you can make in the future.
No, that's not what the executive order stipulates.
But wouldn't this legislation actually allow you to act?
So if payroll taxes are so beneficial in certain instances, why couldn't Congress just pass one?
I'm saying that we should pass this bill because we can actually help save money for lower income constituents and the upper class.
No, but what I'm saying is if there are certain instances in which a payroll tax is good and you actually do have this piece of legislation, couldn't Congress just pass a bill in the future that would do the exact same thing as what the president is doing?
Yeah, that's why I'm saying this bill should be negated. If we pass this bill right now, you won't be able to have all the positive impacts the affirmation tells you.
Thank you. The questioning period has elapsed. Speakers on the affirmation, raise your placard. Senator Lai.
I thank the chair. For my judges, this is Representative Lai, that's spelled L-A-I, speaking for the second time today. If it helps, I was the fourth total speaker on the previous piece of legislation, second negation speaker. Anyways, as usual, I'm at the leisure of all those above me. Judges, PO, just give me a nod, thumbs up when you guys are good. Awesome. Assuming everyone's ready, let's go ahead and start. The infamous thinkers, the Beatles, once wrote, "If you drive a car, I'll tax the street. If you get too cold, I'll tax the heat. If you take a walk, I'll tax your feet. I'm the tax man." It's because the tax man doesn't help our most vulnerable Americans that we have to pass today's piece of legislation. But first, allow me to crystallize the main impacts in today's debate. First, by talking about how the payroll tax cut doesn't benefit small businesses and the average American. And second, because the payroll tax cuts don't help the unemployed. But first, let's talk about how payroll tax cuts don't benefit small businesses and individuals. Frankly, the biggest and only negation impact that Senator Monohar and Chang have brought up. The Market Watch just yesterday reported that small business owners actually don't want a payroll tax deferral. That's because they fear that having to pay more taxes next year with a deferral will be detrimental to the long-term feasibility of their businesses. Overall, these small businesses owners find no tangible benefits to a payroll tax holiday. Deferrals are so bad that these businesses don't even want it. That's why the Washington Business Journal just 2 days ago found that the Pennsylvania Association of Small Businesses has actually declined any possible payroll deferral or tax cut. That's because small businesses are in dire need of economic stimulus, not a tax cut, in addition to the $1.8 trillion CARES Act. That's why passing helps to ensure that they get the stimulus they need, not just a fluky tax cut. Also, let me bring this executive versus congressional argument to an end right here. Senator Smith, Senator Monohar, and Senator Chang, I appreciate your quickly prepared negation speeches. But let's talk about whether Congress or the executive branch should control taxes. Let me bring up my one and only piece of evidence, and that's the US Constitution. Under the Constitution, only the House, this Congress, is allowed to, quote, lay and collect taxes. Under this Constitution, it's this body, Congress, that should have power, total power over taxation, not the executive branch. To go against that principle would be to defy the Constitution that every representative in this room has sworn to uphold. But second, let's talk about how payroll tax cuts don't help the unemployed, something I'm surprised no affirmation speaker has talked about. Representative Sudhakar, Representative Chang, let's talk about how the average American, the hardest hit low-wage American who's currently unemployed, is not helped by a payroll tax cut. The Bureau of Labor Statistics found in 2020 that due to the coronavirus pandemic, over 50 million people are unemployed. But as the Los Angeles Times found just a few weeks ago, if you're not in the labor force, like many elderly and long-term unemployed people, you won't get anything tangible from a payroll tax holiday. Overall, we're seeing that our most vulnerable Americans get absolutely nothing with a payroll tax cut. So, representatives, it's clear that it's time for this Congress to finally listen to the Beatles. Payroll tax cuts won't help the unemployed or small businesses. Let's pass this piece of legislation to focus on real economic recovery that payroll taxes absolutely ignore.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 7 seconds. Questioners, raise your placard. Senator Chang.
Okay, so businesses also benefit from the payroll tax. Why aren't they going to use that money to hire unemployed people?
So as we've seen, small business owners don't want this payroll tax deferral because it's going to harm the long-term. It's going to harm the long-term viability of their business.
Right, but your argument is based only on the Trump payroll tax. What about non-deferral based holiday?
Okay, under this piece of legislation in Section 1, it's only talking about repealing an executive order from this administration. So we're only talking about what Trump has laid out in his tax deferral, nothing else.
Can I move on? So what gives you the confidence that the Senate, which is the cooling saucer of the government—
Senator Gandhi.
You keep stating here today that this is hurting our small business, correct?
Okay, I can't hear you. Can you say that again?
Stating in your speech today that this is hurting our small businesses, correct? Today's legislation.
I still hear you. I'm assuming you're talking about something about small businesses. Overall, we're seeing that small businesses don't want this payroll tax holiday. That's the general consensus.
Out of it.
They get absolutely nothing out of this tax deferral.
And
that's why they don't like it.
Can they opt out of it, as brought up by Senator Sudhakar?
I'm sure you can tell me. I'm pretty sure they can't opt out.
Okay. Even if they can't they use that money to something else for now and later pay in the long term?
Sure, but they're going to have to pay it eventually, which is going to be double next year.
How is it going to be double?
Thank you.
Because they have to pay both years.
Has elapsed. Just so everybody knows, I know the first 3 seconds were completely inaudible. I did not count that towards the time. With that, speakers on the negation, raise your placard.
I thank the chair.
Senator Gandhi.
I thank the chair. My name is Senator Gandhi, spelled Gandhi. Just give me any indication when you're ready for me. Perfect. I assume everyone's ready? Okay. It seems to me many of the senators here today have forgotten that we're amidst a global pandemic. But a pandemic where each and every day we sit here debating a piece of legislation matters. A day where a person can't put food on the table. A day where a person may not have a roof over their head. A day where a person defaults on their loan. This is what we're dealing with each and every day, which is why it's so urgent that we negate today's legislation. Now, Representative Monohar briefly mentions this, but allow me to elaborate how today's legislation is imperative that we keep with the executive branch so that we can take action at a moment's notice. According to the Pew Research Center on January 2018, Congress takes numerous days, even months, to pass any bill involving spending. And this leads to because of the numerous revisions that we go through and the numerous bureaucratic processes that we have. Senator Lai here states Congress should be able to work in a speedy manner, but that's simply false. We are not able to work in a speedy manner. It's simply not a perfect world. Now, if we look to a CNBC in May 4th, 2020, numerous people are getting their jobs back right now. but they have no savings to actually go through for a rainy day in the future. Today's legislation allows them to put money away in a rainy day fund to ensure that they are able to keep themselves up and expect things that they may have not expected in the future. It gives them a bit of money in their hand, a bit of liquidity. Today, we see more and more people needing this money, and then they don't use it. They can go ahead and pay it back once this holiday ends. Now, Senator Wong and Senator Khan both stated in the beginning how today's legislation will grant us oversight. And in the status quo, we have no oversight. But that's false. There's checks and balances in place in the status quo where we can repeal executive actions if needed. We have the power in our hands. If it ever comes to that. Now let's finally clear up some misconceptions brought up by the affirmation here today. Senator Khan, Wong, and Evar Vesio all state it will hurt programs, but today's legislation will not. Because the fact of the matter is, the money will be paid back in the future. This money isn't going anywhere. They either pay it today or they pay it in the future. It doesn't change. Finally, Senator Evar Vesio and Lai both state that people won't pay since they won't. But in the normal world, they're going to be paying it today. What we see here today, rather, with today's legislation, is that they're going to be paying it in the future. So they can use this money to invest in other avenues to maybe earn a bit of income from that money they have sitting, rather than paying it to the government. In the end, we're helping our constituents go through a time that's unprecedented and unlike anything else we've seen in the past. Let's go ahead and help our constituents through this time. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Questioners, raise your placard. Senator Lai.
Okay, the Constitution is important, right?
I agree completely.
Okay, and every congressman here in this room today is sworn to uphold that document, right?
I also agree.
Okay, does the Constitution say that only the House can control legislation about tax?
Okay, we've seen in the past that we've constantly, first of all, we are the Senate here today. And second of all, if we go ahead and look, we've seen numerous executive actions taken that go ahead and do this. And today's legislation
Sure,
does not.
but what does the Constitution say?
Okay, yes, but today's legislation does not control the money.
I yield the rest of my time back to the chair.
Senator Khan.
Right, so if this Congress takes 2 days to pass a piece of legislation, why are we penalizing the American government for something that we can do better? Why don't we just work together for once? We are the literal Congress, right?
I'm trying to say is basically the executive action is able to take these actions much faster. I'm not saying it takes us 2 days.
So are you telling me that anyone in this chamber is going to willingly obstruct legislation that is going to help American people when a payroll tax is needed?
There's numerous revisions that we go through and numerous different things.
You're not answering my question.
We have to do.
Thank you. The questioning period has elapsed. Speakers on the affirmation, raise your placard. Senator Rodriguez, unopposed.
Ooh, point of inquiry.
Yeah, so far.
What time does this round end?
I'll defer to the parliamentarian on this. I know it ends at 4:15. We have one person who doesn't have their second speech. Can we have this speech fit in?
So this is the last speech is what you're suggesting?
It would be the last speech to allow everybody to have 2 speeches, yes.
I will allow it only because we started later and then we will go from there.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, for the second and final time today. That's Christian Rodriguez, whenever you're ready. Okay, is there anyone not ready? Cool, presiding officer. Amazing. When we have a global pandemic and when people are suffering every day, it is reactionary for us to think we must pass solutions as fast as possible. But just because a solution is quick doesn't mean it's the best when possible. This is the logic that makes sure the affirmative wins today's debate, and it's why I urge you all to affirm this legislation. The main negative advocacy has been surrounding that executive action is better than legislative action because executive action is much faster, with Representatives Manohar and Gandhi being the main proprietors of this argument. Here's the problem though. Just because executive action is faster than legislative action isn't always a good thing. Look at the fact that Senators Ivar Vesio and Senators Khan have both explained how this legislation, or rather not this legislation, President Trump's payroll tax holiday cuts Social Security benefits for so many people if they're not paid back in time. You have to realize, sure, this might have short-term impacts, but it doesn't take into consideration the long-term ones. Because a legislative debate, such as the one we're having today, brings up these issues, whereas a president can just sign an executive order and forget about it. Legislative action is significantly better. But then there's this entire negative advocacy that's surrounding about how payroll tax holidays are good and we should fail this bill because this legislation bans them. No, this bill doesn't ban payroll tax holidays. I'm completely misinterpreting this argument of how because this legislation limits executive action, it limits payroll tax holidays. Here's the thing. Congress can pass a bill that says we have one. Look to the New York Times earlier this year when they explained that back in 2010, Senator Walter Minnick passed a legislation that actually implements a payroll tax holiday. Here's the thing. It was better than President Trump because both parties debated it, both parties revised it, and they made sure it helped everyone without any negative consequences. I don't understand this logic of the negative that says payroll tax holidays are good, therefore fail. I'd say the complete opposite. Because they are good, when people actually take consideration on them, then you pass this bill to make sure it is always treated with the utmost respect. But the other clash point in this debate has been whether or not this specific payroll tax holiday, the one President Trump wants to implement, is good or bad, with Senators Chang and Gandhi both saying that because this legislation, or rather payroll tax holiday, doesn't directly affect the benefits of unemployment and Social Security, it's really not a concern. Here's the thing though, it's only not a concern if Congress chooses not to forgive it. There is always a possibility we do, and in those instances, you have to pass this legislation because the Congressional Budget Office explained in August 23rd of 2015 that if Congress chooses to forgive the payroll tax holiday that President Trump implements, what would happen is we would not get any of the money that was deferred to next year. Basically meaning all of the impacts of the affirmative about no benefits going to Americans is going to happen, and we have a crisis on our hands. This legislation is the best of both worlds. And because of that, I urge you to pass.
Thank you for that speech of 3 minutes and 6 seconds. Questioners, raise your placard. Senator Gandhi.
Can we repeal or amend executive actions?
Say that one more time.
Can we repeal or amend executive actions?
Well, I mean, we could pass legislation that like restricts it if that's what you're referring to.
No, can we go ahead, if Trump passes an executive action, can we do anything about it?
Yeah, we can pass legislation to stop it.
Okay, but we can also go ahead and stop that. We have the authority to stop that executive action and do.
Yeah, the problem is the problem with that argument is it's not always a guarantee. Like we can't just say like it's gonna happen no matter what.
I think you misunderstood my argument, mainly because I probably cut out. I'm not saying the president is better just because he's fast. I'm saying in order for a payroll tax cut to be effective, it needs to be implemented fast.
Right.
If Senator Gandhi proved that the bureaucracy of Congress prevents us from using that speed and making it harmful, why should I vote the affirmation?
So I'd say that because swift action often means we look over a lot of key things such as Social Security benefits, I'd argue it's better to take a little bit of time to make sure we hash out the details than pass things as fast.
The problem with a little bit of time is it makes the payroll tax ineffective.
The questioning period has elapsed. Senator Khan, is that a motion?
Yes, seeing as all speakers have spoken twice, I call for the question.
Okay, second. Okay, there is an objection. This objection will basically be needed 2/3 to be voted down. It'll be the same as moving to the question. With that, all those against the objection. Okay, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Clearly that is 2/3. This objection is voted down. Now for the previous question, all those in favor, raise your placard.
Point of order, Mr. President. Is this in favor of the legislation or in favor of the motion?
It's in favor of the previous question, not the legislation itself.
Wait,
the previous vote was on the objection itself. Now it's going to be on the previous question. With that, all those in favor of the previous question. Okay, clearly this motion does pass unanimous consent. With that, we're going to be voting on the legislation. All those in favor of the legislation, please raise your placard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 in favor. All those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Any objections? There should be none. On a vote of 6 to 5, this legislation does pass. Congratulations to the author. Senator Evrar Vesio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adjourn.
Any seconds? All those in favor? Any opposed? Clearly, this does pass. Congratulations, everybody, for a fantastic session. We got through 22 speeches and 52 questions. I was very proud to be your presiding officer. Thank you very much. I'll give it over to the parliamentarian.
Thank you guys all so much. You did a great job today. Best of luck to you in the final outcomes of this, and I hope to see you later throughout the season. If there's any judges who'd like to make any comments, please feel free to do so now.
Great job, guys. It was fun to watch.
All right. If that's it, you guys are free to go. Thank you so much.
Good job,
Thank you
guys.
for judging.
Yeah, thanks to our judges.
Thank you for judging.
You're welcome.
And I dropped the link to the awards, which will be today at 6:30 Eastern time. Links in the chat, but the tournament should also have that available.
Kevin, I have a couple questions. Can you stay on for a minute?
Sure.
I also do, so just one moment too.
Yeah, no problem. And we can probably want to end the live stream before we do that.
I'm on video. Don't come in front of me.
Actually, it might be easier if we have questions for us just to move to the judge
To the
pool
judge room.
room.
Okay.
Just to move to the judge pooling room, just because, yeah.
Okay.